Two Davids Walk Into a Bar was filmed in front of a live studio audience.
This is David Anderson, and I'm here with Mr. David Lawler. And how are you tonight, sir?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm excellent. And we're doing something that we've been working on, it seems like forever, the history of cable.
And we're back at night recording. The nighttime.
Yeah, we're back.
The nighttime is the right time, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it's night for me. It's technically morning for you, but it's night for me. So
well, yeah,
it's dark. It's dark outside, and that's what's important, I guess.
Yes.
And of course you do the vintage cable box articles that are on blissville.net and VHS Rewind.
Yes, very popular. They were very popular when I was writing them. I believe I ended that back in, I'm not sure. Like I think maybe in spring of last year. But I am going to start up soon an offshoot of Vintage Cable Box, which I want to call Vintage Satellite, which will have articles about the time period that we had an HBO satellite from like 1980, I want to say the end of 85 through 87 or something like that. And then maybe even going further into that, like in the 90s when we actually got legitimate cable.
Let me tell you something, mister. Because I have satellite stories because I actually had one of those big-ass 10-foot dishes kind of at the end of the whole situation. I got mine in like 1996.
Yeah.
And that was when sort of the smaller dish DirecTV things were coming up in the world. But I basically caught the end of it. And, man, you want to talk about having every channel.
Yeah.
The only problem was that was the end of the analog era.
Well, I will have a question for you later about channel selection when it comes to those cable services.
Yeah, basically the end of that story, spoiler alert, the end of that story is basically...
You're not the father.
I'm not the father, and I'll do a dance. Basically what happened was... It came to the point where there just weren't enough people with the dishes. They had a business model set up where you could subscribe,
right?
Sometimes directly through HBO, sometimes directly through like other companies that would like give you like packages and everything, almost like satellite cable companies.
Yeah.
But the problem was that everything went digital. You could get a digital receiver, which I did, but even though like the things kept changing, like digital formats, but there was only really one digital format that you could subscribe with.
Well, it was at the height of tube TV, before big screen, before the high def came out. The tube television with the digital and the satellite receiver. I remember it was what we have now with our regular cable packages. You know how they had all the channels for like everything, like and they had music channels that you could listen to. Recording quality, audio, professional sounding, music.
But speaking of that, it's like basically that's what HD kind of killed it for me anyway, and for most people.
Yeah, of course.
When everything went HD and it was digital as well, you could get an add-on, and I did, and I kind of caught the very end of it of like in 2003, 2004, when you could get an adapter for your digital sort of satellite box. This was to be able to get things off of various satellites, and you had to move your dish. Everything went HD, but you could basically only subscribe to maybe 5 or 6 HD channels, like your HBO, your Showtime. I had issues with Stars. There was some sort of weird thing where Stars didn't work, but that was just with my box and a few other boxes. And then a few smattering of other HD channels, and that was it. And it wasn't like...
Well, it's interesting that you brought up business models, because the business model end of this is fascinating, especially with how all of this began, basically in 1949.
All right, hit me with your knowledge.
All right. According to the Wikipedia, and it can be even earlier than this because the Wikipedia is not like the most accurate source for a lot of information.
No, in fact, I actually was able, speaking of cable, I was able to sort of unverify something from a podcast I was listening to where they were talking about and this actually goes to HBO.
Okay.
The Rich Little Christmas Carol,
right?
Which I don't know if you remember that.
HBO, right?
HBO was on HBO, and the Wikipedia says that it didn't premiere until 1982.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember specifically watching it because we got HBO in 1981.
Yeah.
Watching it, I believe, that Christmas, and then turned out it was actually produced in '79 in Canada, but was actually on HBO in 1979. So it was like produced kind of like perhaps maybe with HBO money, maybe not, but
yes,
they
you
bought it.
You can probably, I mean, these pictures pop up all the time on the vintage HBO guides.
That's what I did. I actually found it.
And there was the ad, and I do believe I saw that picture of the Rich Little Christmas Carol.
Yeah, I sent that, and I was like, well, here's some clarification.
There's another great site, Vintage HBO Guides on Facebook. It's a Facebook group, very nice people. They've hosted my articles for a couple of years, and I always get great feedback from them. And I conjure up a lot of old memories when I'm talking about movies.
Oh, let me tell you,
television.
I was able to find an HBO guide from December of 1981 because I had a specific memory of watching Superman the movie.
Yes.
On HBO that night, on the night right before my birthday, December 8th, 1981. And I remembered it, and I looked it up. I was like, yep, it was on, like, I think like 7, 8 o'clock or something.
And there's a website that you can go to, HBOguides.com, where this guy has painstakingly put together old HBO guides, scanned them into the computer, put them on a website. It's fantastic. And I really missed that. But we'll talk about that when we get to HBO.
We'll get to that later. But okay, so you have the history of
basically saying that subscription services started in 1948 and 1949, but what was being done back then was a form of pay television. It was single channel services where I believe Zenith. It was actually Zenith who bought into this.
We should have bought a Zenith.
It was the Zenith who bought into this this idea, this proposal in 1939. And their idea was called pay-as-you-look television, otherwise known as phone vision, where they used a phone line. Wow. And this was early pay-per-view. And what it was generally was some movies, lots of sporting events, and a couple of, like, I guess what you might call, like, what the kind of stuff that PBS shows, opera, classical music, that kind of stuff.
Almost like the early version of Fathom Events, you could almost say.
I guess.
They did a lot of that.
But, again, it costs $1 per program. You could only buy one program at a time, and it would cost you $1. And it came through a phone line. And Zenith had a box that you put on top of the TV with an on-off switch. You put the phone line into the box like some kind of a modem, and then that box you put your antenna leads, I guess, in the back of the television that you bought.
Yeah.
And that was pay-per-view for the time. And this is what's shocking to me, is that this is almost identical a business model as to how streaming works today, because eventually movie studios got into this to show movies that were not quite recent. They were still running in theaters.
Yeah.
Maybe 2 years old at most. They would run their movies, companies like Paramount, Famous Players, of course, Universal, and 20th Century Fox all invested in these coin, almost coin-operated machines that were these boxes that you would put on the TV. And then later on, televisions for a couple of years until this whole business dried out because, frankly, and this is the problem here, there weren't enough people who owned televisions, and there weren't enough people who wanted to subscribe to these channels because they were kind of expensive for their time.
Now, do you think that something like this was sort of altered slightly and then became the thing where people had in hotels? Is it very similar to kind of what people? I mean, maybe the technology will be different.
Yeah,
later.
I do remember back in the 50s and 60s, you would have this coin-operated television. Oh, I think even probably as late as the 80s, because I swear I remember when we were making our move back up to Philadelphia. No, we were making we were making our move back up to Philadelphia, and there was still a coin-operated goddamn television set in the motel room.
Well, I don't know.
I swear to God, like a quarter.
I know
and
my
you get
parents,
like maybe 4 hours of programming.
Yeah, I remember my parents gave me this story about, like, they went to, like, they were traveling or something, and they went to a hotel, and they were able to watch, like, I believe it was Full Metal Jacket. Like, I guess this was around like 87, 88.
Would you have to call the front desk and order the movie there?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what they didn't give me the whole story.
Because this is before this was before the pay-per-view where you would hit it on your remote to order it or something.
Yeah, before everything was like technology and you could have addressable boxes and everything like that. No, I don't think it was like that. I think it was like, hell, it may have even literally been something where it's like they had an in-house guy with a VCR, and if you ordered it, you just push a button and then the guy would just put the tape in the thing.
And the VCR was on a handle and he would just take it from room to room.
I don't know, but
probably it was like that.
Yeah.
But this is exactly how movie studios are trying to do it now. They were trying to, in a sense, have their cake and eat it too, whereby they could show you movies, but you don't get to own them. They get to keep them, and you're just kind of like, it's like a peep show. You're like, you put in your buck and you got your program, and this is how movie studios are trying to handle.
Well, I mean, remember the original sort of business model of movies. It was always sort of this thing where it existed in the theater and you paid to see it, but the theater owned it. The theater owned it, or the studio owned it, or whatever. It wasn't something you could physically own. Now they could sell you little ancillary things like music from the movie, like a book of the movie. But they
were trying something really bold and ambitious for the time because, again, like I said, not many people own TVs and not many people are willing to do this. The reason streaming is comparatively cheaper now, we're talking about in equivalency to today's dollars, between $40 and $80 a month for one channel, essentially. Yeah. And you would have to get another channel if you wanted it. Like Paramount's telemeter network showed Paramount movies and Paramount products, whatever, from 1953 until 1965. And it was a very expensive service, and it was expensive because you had fewer customers. This was considered state-of-the-art. This was like your electronic, hi-fi, state-of-the-art techno people who would get in on this. They would buy all the latest stuff. They had them back then, too. Early adopters, they called them. Those people who paid $5,000 for the first iPhone, people like that. Those are the kind of people that were investing in this, but it wasn't returning much money. It was successful in a way that they had a good amount of maybe about 400 subscribers, but that's not enough to pay the bills. And this now the reason streaming is so cheap today is because everyone has a TV, everyone wants to stream movies, so it's essentially the same business model. You have, you and I have the same sort of Roku technology. I have an add-on, but you have it built into your TV, and it's so easy. And hell, you can even use your Roku and just put like some sort of like put the Vudu app or some other Fandango app or something in there. Yeah. And you can basically, you don't have to go to the video store anymore. You can just rent a movie at like, $6 a pop. Yeah. But we've talked about the disadvantages of that too, where these companies can just pull the programming and it's not always there on a permanent basis.
If it's rental, it's okay. But yeah, if you've purchased something digitally, this is what I've said this before. This is what I do. I buy the disc, but then it has like a digital code, and you put the digital code in. So at least you've got some sort of internet version of the movie, but you still own the physical removed disc.
for some various reason, like somebody bought the rights and they don't want to show it. But that died, like I said, around 1965. Now, around that time, Time Life partnered with Sterling Manhattan Cable to put cable television into the homes of people who lived in Lower Manhattan only, and it was sort of the beginning of what would become Manhattan Cable in New York, and then eventually that would kind of offshoot to this thing called the Green Channel, which eventually became HBO in 1972 in November.
Now, was the original intent because this is the way I remember us getting cable for us when we finally moved into a neighborhood where we could, which was literally like a few blocks up the street we could get cable, but where we lived we couldn't.
Yeah, just like Philly. Actually, Philly was like that.
The reason is like we had like an outside antenna, and it was hard to get local channels sometimes, and it'd be like we can get all of our local channels in halfway decent reception. We're getting weird bars. We don't have to like have, it's almost like having a dish where it's like it moved, like the antenna had to move to get like certain channels. You had to move the antenna, and it's like, oh, okay, well, we can get a block of local channels. No, we can get them all good. And then we can also get, by then we would be able to get like pay services. And I'm guessing that's what their idea was, be able to pipe all these channels that people have in various areas that have trouble being able to get reception. You can get all these local channels. We'll tack on a few of these.
That was the big problem in Manhattan, because Manhattan Brooklyn, Queens were all near like airports. There were like 3 major airports in that area alone, and oftentimes, if it wasn't the traffic from the airplanes flying overhead, it was the communications equipment that the towers were using was interfering. So this whole thing, which was it was called cable television, but it was actually short for community antenna television, is what it was called, would give you a crystal clear image because it was wired directly in. And these old TVs that they had at the time were built with additional RF, internal RF leads, which would connect to a cable, which would go out onto a massive cable connection that they had in Lower Manhattan at the time.
Yeah, I remember the.
So
older
reception
TVs,
was really terrible back in New York. I remember that.
I remember the older TVs. You know, you'd have a knob. Sometimes you'd have a button, but you had to basically had to be converted to you'd have the cable box and you'd have the option of either channel 3 or channel 4.
Yes.
And it would go through the RF and it would basically have to go through the TV's antenna input to be able to give you a picture. Later they would have audio video outputs and it'd be a less crappy, sometimes less snowy version of that.
And once they had perfected the coaxial cable.
Yes.
Now, at around that time, slightly before HBO premiered, only in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, as a test community, they picked it out because it was in the pipeline between Philadelphia and New York. So they ran that wire down to Wilkes-Barre. They put it up there on the pole. They did put it up on the poles because sometimes cable goes underground, sometimes it goes above ground. And they used Wilkes-Barre as a test community for HBO. Found out it was a huge hit. Now, around this time, certain big cities were still not getting cable. Philadelphia being one of them. Chicago being the worst example because Chicago was so caught up in mafia and political influence, money changing hands, they were trying to keep Chicago from having cable television for years. Now, what happened was that these mafia and political influences had their palms greased by UHF-owned descrambling technology. So you had things like On TV, you had WHT, Wilmeco Home Theater, which was over here in the Northeast. You had TeleFirst. These were not full cable channels. You can get a lot of this great information from Ben Bonneau in his Oddity Archive. He does a great...
Yeah, and I saw that one. It was a good one.
He does a great rundown of all of this, and he's essentially talking about how it was just 4 or 5 hours of late night programming. They did everything they could to keep you from actually owning it, and you had to use a scrambler box to even play whatever you recorded on your VCR, and then the scramble would change and you wouldn't be able to really own it.
It was a very sort of crude system that was easily hacked if you knew electronics.
I was going to ask did you know of, do you remember those off-label converter boxes that were sold at places like Radio Shack?
Well, yeah, but they would basically, the off-label, they would basically just, that would kind of be the later of basic cable, because in the early days of cable, they didn't they would just send it out and you could just pick it up, even HBO.
Yeah, that's
because you needed a box.
I never got HBO. I just ran it. I ran the wire from my roof down to my apartment.
You told me this story of quasi legal.
And I would no. It was plain flat illegal. I just didn't want to pay. So I ran the wire from my roof down to the box, and every now and then the Paragon cable guy would come see that wire and cut it, and then I would just go and reconnect it after he left. It was easy. So I had this indication that the cable company was aware that there was some. They
could sense a box was doing something, or maybe
they could sense a wire was active.
Maybe they did sweeps, or maybe the fact that they were in the building for somebody else. Saw the wire and were like, "What's going on here?"
And then every few days they happen to come to my building quite a bit. And it was a brownstone in Manhattan. There were only how many? 1, 2, 3.
Once they figure it out,
15 apartments. Yeah. But I had access to the roof, and I would just go up there every so often. Sometimes he would cut it too short, go right 3 blocks down to Radio Shack, pick up another 50-foot coaxial cable. And the Radio Shack people were like, "Why is this kid buying so many coaxial cables?" And then I finally was like, I'm spending more money on these coaxial cables than it would cost me just to get the service. So I just finally bit the bullet and bought cable.
Yeah.
$30 a month. I think we had HBO.
Oh, yes. I love HBO.
You had your basic, you had your, you had basic, right? But you also had a better tier of basic with more channels. And then you would have your premium channels.
Yeah, I remember, and I think I sent you the picture. Maybe we'll use it of my initial cable channel lineup all the way up. This was like in 1985,
Right?
And it was still only, I think I did like it was like 30 some channels, and that was like kind of the new expanded basic that we had.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And because we were like, oh, Discovery Channel, and then you'd have like the only premium stations we had at the time were HBO and Showtime, and then we got the movie channel in '86, and we didn't get Cinemax until 1994. So that was all we had.
We had a package.
It was all analog cable at the time.
Well, we had a package that consisted of HBO and Cinemax together, and the movie channel was a different company, but we had that also.
Interesting bit of history on the movie channel. It was originally owned by Warner Communications or something until they sold it to Viacom, which then it became Showtime, a part of Showtime.
Showtime Networks, yeah.
And now, Warner, Time Warner, HBO, it's all kind of like one, they basically owned one pay service and then got HBO eventually.
Now, and according to my information, I believe Select TV in Sacramento. This also comes courtesy of Ben Minot, I'm not sure. Lasted until 1991. It was the last UHF scrambled channel system. These companies would buy up these UHF channels and then put their scrambled programs on those channels, and the scrambler was offered to unlock the stations.
Yeah.
And then that's when you had all these people. Your friend who was good with electronics said, hey, I figured out how to descramble that.
It was really simple. Something popped in my head. Z channel, was that cable or was
Z channel was, I believe it was also a it was a local Los Angeles, Hollywood, Southern California cable station, but it was local. Now local is a good segue because I can talk about the local channel that we had in Philadelphia. It was called Prism, and it showed mainly hockey and basketball games. Didn't show baseball. Baseball was regular television, but it would show these and uninterrupted movies, a lot of sporting events too. Prism was also, I don't believe that it might have been 24 hours. I'm not sure at that time that I remember Prism being around. Prism's no longer in service a lot. A lot of those local channels were just killed.
I feel like Prism, like that's popping in my head as some sort of, they did a lot of sort of experimental, like pay-per-view things, interactive things. Like I know there were a few cable systems that tried these things like in the 80s when it was very clunky.
They weren't pay-per-view. They were like $10 a month. If you had cable in that area. Now, there were certain areas of Philadelphia that didn't have cable at that time until 1989. Because Philadelphia was a historic town, there were a lot of historical landmarks. So an ordinance was set up that said, you can't hang wires in front of these beautiful homes that were occupied by people like Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Betsy Ross, Independence Hall, places like that. This is the old section of Philadelphia, which was below the Broad Street line, which was technically 14th Street, but we called it Broad Street.
So, but maybe they could string it along the Rocky statue. Or something.
What they did, what they eventually did, everything past Broad Street, you could get cable, but everything south of it, toward the river, the Delaware River, you couldn't. But in 1989, they came up with a compromise to run the cable underground. That way, it did not uglify the neighborhood, and cable lines do tend to uglify the neighborhood a lot. I mean, my street is a very beautiful street. It's tree-lined. It's very nice looking, but we've got wires everywhere. And also, I had my problem a few months back. Remember when my service went out completely for 3 days?
Yeah.
That was because the wire had begun to droop, and a truck passed by and completely cut it in half. So I lost everything for 3 days. And let me tell you, those were the 3 best days of my life. I was actually able to unwind, clear my head, not get so fucking angry about social media. But it came back, and we're all on our computers now. We're all like...
And now you're back, and you're more angry than ever.
Angry. But that's the disadvantage of having those overhead lines, other than them uglifying your neighborhood. Are your lines underground or over there?
Here's what I have, and I've had a few of these things. In my old neighborhood, it was underground, but then if you went just a few blocks, it would be all on wires. It would, like you could see like all the wires were strewn across, and trees. There's lots of trees, because it's Washington State, lots of trees and everything. Kind of the same where I live now. I live on a hill. Everything is underground, including like the power lines, which is good because then when our power goes out, it's usually some sort of like main system failure as opposed to like the wire coming to our house, so that at least when we have power outages, it's usually only for like a couple hours, even when like big storms.
Right.
And it's the same with cable. It's all underground for both of the, because I'm lucky, I have an option of two cable cable internet services, and I picked one of them. And so everything is underground now. You go down the hill and you start walking and you start getting into interesting sort of white trashy areas. Mm-hmm. It's all back on wires. So it's kind of it's a mix and match kind of situation.
It's interesting. In Tennessee, when we first had cable, that was like the first thing we grabbed when we moved down there. All the cable was underground. Because I do
Hankins
remember Drive, where we lived, was a very, very beautiful looking area.
I do remember there being some issues because at my old place where the cable was underground, and because of that, and again, it's the Washington State area, lots of rain and crappy wiring, and water seeped into the wire, and they had to figure out what was going on. This was the old analog cable days, so everything would like past a certain channel would be all snowy, and it became like, and then he finally figured it out, and then our picture actually like improved, but it took like a 2 or 3 tries for them to actually put a wire in properly.
Right. Upstate New York, we had some problems with Comcast. It's very interesting. It's a trade-off because Comcast upstate had poor service but a really great lineup of channels. Spectrum down here recently, it was Time Warner, and then it was bought by Spectrum, has really great service but really shitty channel lineup, and very expensive too to boot.
Yeah, but I would think everything is sort of homogenized now, where a lot of people will basically get generally the same channel lineup. Basically, if you have digital cable, everybody's gonna. I mean, I have Frontier. I could have Comcast. The lineup is generally the same. There's actually a few more channels on Frontier, but then there's a few channels missing. I've been tempted because our building is wired for everything. We have like 4 or 5 different cable companies, including Verizon. Okay, competition.
And I've been tempted to go with other service. I was tempted to go with Verizon Fios because they had such a great deal, and then my neighbor discouraged me. He said, "Yeah, it's a great deal at first, and then they hook you in, and it winds up costing way more."
Well, what I do is, and I have basically Frontier is basically slowly buying up Verizon's Fios like across the country. So it would be basically what I have, because it's basically Frontier Fios, but it was Verizon. Yeah, what you do is you can if you're nice and you call them up and you say, I would like this package, I would like kind of this price, can you give me some promo deals? I mean, that's why my cable bill is what it is, because I was able to say, okay, can you give me this promo?
Yes. Comcast did bargain with me. They wanted to keep my service. Spectrum doesn't give a rat's ass. They don't care. I even said, I want to cancel my cable service. They're like, fine. They were like, fuck you. Go ahead.
Fuck you.
They didn't care. They called my bluff. So I was like, oh, shit. But, it's just that I don't like people messing with my shit. Plus, when I get used to something, like the one thing I can say Spectrum really does well, and Time Warner did, was their internet service is incredible. It's very high speed.
My internet much improved. I mean, we've had conversations about my weird internet, and like it much improved when they fixed the thing on the side of the house. Now my internet's great, but it was great internet, except every once in a while it would just crap out for half an hour once in a while.
Yeah.
Now it doesn't do that, and I'm like, oh, thank goodness I have proper internet now, because it would get frustrating.
Well, I mean, look at how far we came. We came from when we started with, there was actual pay-per-view television. It was running through phone lines. We had descrambling technology for a little while, and then we get into 1972 when HBO starts. And that's where we leave it off for this episode, because in our next episode, we will be talking about HBO.
Like I said, when we moved from my house, this was, I think I was like, was I 9? Yeah, when we moved, it's weird, like we would always move just a few blocks up the street. Like we like from when I was born until I finally moved out, we moved like 4 times, and we maybe moved a couple of miles, like literally, because it's just a few blocks each time. And we moved like every 4 years, except for the last house when I was trapped in forever. But basically, I have early memories of cable, of wanting. First, I'd bug my dad to call up, like, "Are we getting cable?" And he'd call him because he'd humor me. And I was like, I just want to. And at the time, and it's kind of, maybe this goes back to our show about The Wiz. I remember seeing in the TV section in the Seattle Times, we would get like you see the TV section and it'd be like it'd be all kind of the local channels, and then it would be like a little grid of like pay channels. Yeah. So it'd be like HBO. It's like, oh, The Wiz is on. Yeah. Oh, I want to watch that. And this would be like 79-ish, I guess.
First movie I ever watched on HBO was The Man with Two Brains.
Ooh.
I'll never forget that.
Well, for various different reasons, I think. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'm trying to think of, okay, so I'm like, when are we going to get cable? And then my mom finds out about like how awesome it is. And then she's like, we're going to get cable when we go to the new place because we're going to have cable. And what we did was we got HBO, because this was back in the day when if you paid for HBO and you paid for Showtime, but you tried to have it like on one box, they would double charge you. And they would double charge you, and then if you tried to have it in another room, they would double charge you.
Right.
Like there was like, they finally passed some sort of cable act to fix that. But so basically, to sort of, I guess, to save money, we'd have HBO in one room and Showtime in the other room. So our bases were covered.
Right.
But I was like, it was like this like a mind-blowing situation. I have early memories of when we first got cable in the one room watching, I think maybe even on the same day or around the same chunk of days, Forbidden Planet. And that kind of freaked me out because of that music. Mm-hmm. And A Clockwork Orange. with my dad and my brother, and I'm just sitting there, and it's they showed it late-ish because it is a heavy movie, and I'm just there, just sitting watching A Clockwork Orange at the age of 9. I don't know if that's appropriate. And I either got bored or weirded out, I don't know. And then in the other room, who had HBO, and I'm trying to think of my early HBO memories. I'm remembering this movie. It's called Wife Mistress.
Okay.
And I think it's kind of a dirty movie.
Okay.
And I just remember it being on in the wee hours, but that's all I remember. Let's see, what else do I remember? And like I said, the Superman memory, but that's like a little bit later. It's maybe like 5 months later, because we got it in August, I think. I remember the installer guy. It was a very hot day when he installed it. Oh yeah, I think the first thing I saw when he installed the cable was some sort of like thing that would bored me. It was like some sort of like stage play or musical play or something. Right. And I'm like, ugh. But I also remember
the major advantage for us at the time of getting cable was that we didn't need an antenna anymore. And
that was
Philly was really bad. Philly had bad reception always, all the time. Siren remembers, and she wasn't even born. But having the cable, we never had to have the stupid rabbit ears on top of the TV, have to move them around just to get that best signal.
Yeah, we wanted to be able to get Channel 12, darn it, and we had to. It wouldn't be snowy. Yeah. Channel 12 was in Bellingham, which is almost in Canada. Mm-hmm. And we were able to get Canadian channels. It was great. Some early memories of being able to watch like the CBC, because we're so close. They would give us the CBC. So we were able to get CBC, which is, I think, something that I don't get on Frontier now. I think you can get it on Comcast, but you can't get it on Frontier. But I'm not really missing it. So, and then later, of course, when they would show stuff on CBC and an American TV, they would just, like, the cable company would just say, due to licensing issues, we have blocked this program.
Oh,
everything like that. Yeah.
Before we wrap it up tonight, for this episode, I want to say that right now, as we're recording this, Spectrum has blocked Channel 11. It's a Tribune station. Tribune. Mm-hmm. When you go to Channel 11 on my box, Spectrum says Tribune's a bunch of dirty bastards. They're greedy. They want twice the money that we paid them last year for the same service, and it's free, and you can get it on a digital antenna. But they want more money from us, and this message repeats over and over again. Mm-hmm. One of the disadvantages of cable, I want to in the future get into that a little bit about the cost of buying the rights for channels and who in the end ultimately gets ripped off. And I suspect it's people like you and me.
Yeah, I actually have a similar story to that. Okay, so and they may even be a Tribune station for all I know. Our Frontier is in some sort of tiff with the company that owns my local CBS affiliate, Cairo, K-I-R-O. I have not had CBS. It's a CBS station. I have not had Cairo CBS since January of 2018. They did the similar thing. First, they did the thing where it's like, this company is being stupid heads, and this is why you can't. And then after
they're running
a while,
the same kind of passive aggressive announcement on the channel.
But now it's not even in the, like, if you put the channel in, it won't even go to, like, it just skips over, because they can do that with digital where they can just skip over the channel.
Yeah.
Now it's not even in. Now luckily I have the CBS All Access streaming service, and they will let you watch your local affiliate. So I can just, if I really want to watch, let's say, local news off of Cairo, because most of the time if I wanted to watch that channel, I would be wanting to watch CBS programming, which you can get on that CBS app anyway. So, but I can stream, if I want to, I can stream my local channel. It's a workaround, I guess. But I'm basically paying $6 a month to watch one channel, but that's okay, because I want to be able to watch the new Star Trek and other stuff that's on that CBS app. But that's kind of a workaround that a lot of people don't have. And say, what if they like the local channel? What if they want to watch the local news on Cairo? Maybe they like those.
There's only one thing I watch on Channel 11 at this point, is The Honeymooners, and I already have the whole show anyway. But I'm hoping that this dispute ends before baseball season begins, because Channel 11 does show Mets games.
It's been a year here. I don't know.
They have to. I mean, there's in New York, you're dead if you're not on cable. But that's all for now for this episode of The History of Cable. I am the Russian bot, David Lawler, and I was joined by the NPC, David Anderson. And thank you, and have a good night. I was thinking that would be our new catchphrases for 2019. I'll be the Russian bot, you be the NPC.
What is an NPC? NPC? What am I?
NPC, non-player character. Look it up. It's kind of a,
I'll look it up.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
I was a little too young to remember cable coming into Chicago. By the time I could even form a memory, we had already had it. My parents got it sometime in the 80s, and because of a nice glitch with the cable company, they had all the movie channels for like 2 years before they caught on. So, and with their Betamax machine, they had recorded pretty much every great movie that had ever came on, Showtime, Cinemax, HBO. Unfortunately, we no longer had those. We got rid of those sometime in the early 90s. We gave them to my uncle. Most of the time, like when I was younger, I would watch Nickelodeon, because that was when it was becoming a big thing. Always watch the old shows like You Can't Do That on Television, Out of Control. I remember 6:30 every night I was watching Looney Tunes on Nickelodeon. Was like the greatest thing I could ever watch, because I'd have to wait till Saturday mornings to watch the rest of the good cartoons. Nickelodeon at least had cartoons every day up until 7 o'clock.